The morning sun beat down merciless on Dry Creek, Texas painting the dusty Main Street in shades of rust and gold. It was the kind of heat that made men mean and women desperate, the kind that turned hope into something you scraped off your boots at the end of the day. Margaret Rose Quinn stood before the cracked mirror in her cramped bedroom, staring at the yellowed wedding dress that hung on her like a shroud. The lace had gone brittle with age, and moth holes dotted the sleeves like tiny wounds. It had been her mother's dress once, back when dreams still grew in this God-forsaken land. "Stop your dawdling, girl," Samuel Quinn's voice thundered through the thin walls. "Cole's expecting you by noon, and I aim to deliver." Margaret's jaw tightened. Deliver? Like she was a heifer or a sack of grain. She'd known this day would come ever since her father had stumbled home 3 nights ago, reeking of whiskey and defeat. He'd lost everything at the poker table, the last of their cattle, the deed to the eastern pasture, and when that wasn't enough to cover his debts, he'd thrown in his eldest daughter like an afterthought. "You hear me, Margaret?" The door shook under his fist. "I hear you," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. At 18, she'd learned to hide her fear behind a mask of defiance. It was the only currency a woman had in a place like Dry Creek. She tucked the small knife into her boot, the one her grandmother had given her years ago. "For peeling apples," the old woman had said with a wink, though they both knew better. In the wild territories, a woman needed more than prayers to keep safe. The dress rustled as she moved, whispering secrets of happier times. Her mother had worn it with joy, married a man she'd chosen, but choice was a luxury Samuel Quinn's daughters couldn't afford. Outside, she heard the wagon creak as their neighbor, Tom Bradley, prepared to drive her to her fate. The whole town knew the story by now, how Samuel had bet his daughter to settle a debt with Ethan Cole, the man who lived alone on the big ranch north of town, the man whose wife had run off 5 years back, leaving nothing but rumors in her wake. Couldn't stand his cold ways. The gossips said, "Man's got a heart of stone." Others whispered, "Lucky she got out alive." The boldest claimed. Margaret had seen Ethan Cole exactly 3 times in her life. Once at the general store, where he'd bought supplies without speaking a word. Once at the church, standing in the back during Easter service, his face unreadable as granite. And once at her mother's funeral, where he'd left wildflowers on the grave, the only person outside family to do so. She fastened the last button and took a breath. Whatever Ethan Cole was, whatever darkness lived in that ranch house, it couldn't be worse than staying under her father's roof. At least with Cole, she'd know what kind of prison she was walking into. The door burst open. Samuel stood there, his bloodshot eyes taking in the sight of his daughter in the ancient dress. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps, or the ghost of the man he used to be. Then it was gone, replaced by the harsh lines that whiskey and disappointment had carved. "You clean up decent enough," he grunted. "Cole won't have cause to complain." "And if he does," Margaret lifted her chin, "will you take me back, find another way to pay your debts?" His laugh was bitter as desert wind. "You know better than that. A deal's a deal. You'll make do, just like your mother did." The words stung more than any blow. Her mother had made do. All right, made do until the cholera took her, leaving behind 2 daughters and a husband who'd rather find comfort in a bottle than face his grief. "Is Lily ready?" Margaret asked. Her sister was only 14, too young to understand why Margaret had to leave, too young to be left alone with their father's temper. "She's staying with the Bradleys for now." Samuel's eyes shifted away. "Until I figure things out." Relief flooded through her. Tom and Martha Bradley were good people. They'd keep Lily safe, at least for a while. "Time to go," Samuel said, already turning away. "Don't want to keep your husband waiting." Husband. The word sat heavy in her mouth, foreign as a stone. The ride to Cole's ranch stretched on under the brutal sun. Tom Bradley kept his eyes on the road, uncomfortable with his role in this transaction. Margaret sat between him and her father, the wedding dress already damp with sweat, the knife in her boot pressed against her ankle, a small comfort. "Heard tell Cole's got near 1,000 head of cattle now," Tom ventured, trying to fill the silence. "Built that ranch up from nothing after the war." Samuel spat tobacco juice over the side. "Man's got everything except what matters. Money can't buy you a woman's love." "Seems it can buy you a woman, though," Margaret said quietly. The slap came quick, rocking her sideways. Tom's hands tightened on the reins, but he said nothing. That was the way of things in Dry Creek. Men settled their business, and decent folks looked away. Margaret touched her cheek, tasting copper where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. She didn't cry. She'd learned long ago that tears only made things worse. The Cole Ranch sprawled across the horizon like a small kingdom. The main house sat solid and imposing, built from limestone and timber that must have cost a fortune to freight in. Barns and corrals spread out in neat lines, everything speaking of order and prosperity. It was the opposite of the chaos and decay she'd known. Ethan Cole waited on the porch, a tall figure cast in shadow. As they pulled up, he stepped into the light, and Margaret got her first real look at the man who'd bought her like livestock. He was older than she'd thought, maybe pushing 40, with silver threading through dark hair. His face was weathered but not unkind, carved by sun and wind into something stark and uncompromising. Gray eyes watched their approach without emotion, taking in the spectacle of a father delivering his daughter like a package. "Quinn," he said by way of greeting. His voice was low, rough as sandpaper. "Cole." Samuel hauled himself from the wagon, suddenly eager to be done with it. "Brought her as promised, all legal and proper." Ethan's gaze moved to Margaret, still sitting in the wagon. She met his eyes steadily, refusing to look away. Something shifted in his expression, too quick to name. "There's a minister inside," he said. "Thought it best to make things official." "No need for fancy ceremonies," Samuel said. "She'll do as she's told." Nevertheless, Ethan's tone brooked no argument. "We'll do this right or not at all." He offered his hand to help Margaret down from the wagon. She ignored it, gathering her skirts and climbing down on her own. The knife shifted in her boot, reminding her of its presence. The house was cool inside, a blessed relief from the heat. The minister, a nervous young man from the traveling circuit, waited in what must be the parlor. It was a masculine room, all dark wood and leather, but clean. A woman's touch lingered in small details: curtains at the windows, a vase on the mantel, though empty of flowers. "Shall we begin?" the minister asked. Clearly uncomfortable with the circumstances, but unwilling to challenge them, Margaret found herself standing before the cold fireplace, Ethan beside her, while the minister opened his Bible with shaking hands. The words of the ceremony washed over her, meaningless as creek water. Love, honor, obey, empty promises for an empty union. When it came time for her vows, something snapped inside her. All the rage, all the humiliation, all the stolen choices crystallized into a single moment of defiance. She pulled the knife from her boot in one smooth motion and drove it into the mantel with all her strength. The blade sank deep into the wood, quivering there like an accusation. "I am not a thing to be traded," she said, her voice ringing clear in the shocked silence. "I am not cattle or land or poker chips. I am a person, and I will not pretend otherwise." The minister's Bible hit the floor. Samuel's face went purple with rage, but Margaret kept her eyes on Ethan, waiting for his reaction, the shout, the blow, the proof that he was just like every other man who thought women were property. Instead, he studied the knife in his mantle with something almost like approval. When he finally spoke, his words changed everything. "I do not want you because they sent you," he said quietly. "I want you only if you choose me." The room went still as death. Even Samuel's bluster died in his throat. Ethan turned to face her fully. There's a horse saddled in the barn. Take it and ride back to town if that's your wish. Or stay, but only if you choose to. I'll not have an unwilling wife." "Now see here, Cole," Samuel started. "We had a deal." "Our deal is done." Ethan cut him off. "Your debts are paid whether she stays or goes. That was my choice. Now the rest is hers." He moved past them to the door, pausing only to look back at Margaret. "I'll be in the barn seeing to the stock. Whatever you decide, the minister will wait to complete the ceremony or to witness your departure. Either way, you'll leave this house as a free woman." Then he was gone, boot heels echoing across the porch. Margaret stood frozen, the knife still trembling in the wood. In all her 18 years, no man had ever given her a choice. The freedom of it was terrifying, vast as the Texas sky. "You fool girl," Samuel hissed. "You'll get back here and finish what we started." But his words had no power now. Ethan had stripped them away with a few simple sentences. She walked to the mantel and worked the knife free, sliding it back into her boot. Then she faced her father for what she hoped would be the last time. "Go home," she said. "Take your wagon and your shame and get off this land." "You can't. I can." She stood straighter. "Mister, Cole said my choice. I choose to see you gone." Tom Bradley cleared his throat. "Come on, Samuel. Best we leave the young folks to sort things out." Her father looked between them all, his daughter standing proud in the moth-eaten dress, the minister clutching his Bible like a shield, Tom waiting by the door. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured bellows. "Don't come crying to me when he shows his true nature," he muttered, but he was already moving toward the door. "You've made your bed." When the wagon rolled away, dust rising in its wake, Margaret finally let herself breathe. The minister gathered his courage enough to speak. Mrs. That is, what would you have me do?" She looked around the room, at this house that might be a prison or might be something else entirely. Through the window, she could see Ethan in the corral, working with a young horse. His movements were patient, gentle, nothing like the brutal breaking she'd witnessed on other ranches. "Wait," she said finally. "Give me an hour to think. Then I'll tell you whether there'll be a wedding or not." The minister nodded, sinking into a chair with obvious relief. Margaret walked through the house, taking its measure. The kitchen was well stocked but had the sterile feel of a place where only the basics of survival happened. The bedrooms upstairs were spare, functional. But in one, she found a shelf of books, their spines worn from reading, poetry, novels, even a few primers on cattle breeding and land management. On the dresser sat a photograph in a silver frame. A young woman smiled from it, pretty in that delicate way that didn't last long in the territories. This must be the wife who'd left, who'd found Ethan Cole so terrible she'd fled into the night rather than stay. But something bothered Margaret about the picture. The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. Her hands were clenched in her lap, knuckles white with tension. This wasn't a woman in love. This was a woman posing, playing a part. Like Margaret in her mother's wedding dress. She found herself at the barn, watching Ethan work with the horse. He'd stripped off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves. His hands were gentle on the animal's neck, his voice low and soothing. The horse, which had been skittish and wall-eyed when she first saw it, now stood quiet under his touch. "Her name's Storm," he said without looking up. "Found her caught in barbed wire out on the range. Took some time to earn her trust." "And did you?" Margaret asked. "Earn it." He patted the mare's neck one last time and stepped out of the corral. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the scar that ran through his left eyebrow, a hard life written on skin and bone. "Trust ain't something you earn once and keep forever," he said. "It's earned new each day, in small acts and kept promises." "Your wife," Margaret said carefully. "They say she left because Because she never wanted to come in the first place. His voice was matter-of-fact, empty of self-pity. Her father owed money, same as yours. I was young and foolish enough to think I could make her happy anyway. Took 5 years for her to save enough from the household money to buy stage fare back east. You didn't stop her. Why would I? He looked genuinely puzzled. A cage is still a cage, even if the bars are gold. She wrote me once she got to Chicago. Married a shopkeeper, has 3 children now. Says she's happy. I hope it's true. Margaret studied him. This strange man who spoke of freedom like it mattered. And you, are you happy? Content, he said after a pause. It's not the same, but it's enough. Or was. He met her eyes then, and she saw something there. Not desire, exactly, but a kind of recognition. I won't lie to you, Miss Quinn. I'm near 40 years old, set in my ways. I work from dawn to dusk and sometimes forget to talk for days at a time. I've no pretty words or gentle graces, but I'd never raise a hand to you, never force you to anything against your will. The choice to stay or go would always be yours. Why? The question came out harsher than she intended. Why pay my father's debts? Why bring me here at all if you don't mean to own you? He smiled then. A small, sad thing. Maybe because I remember what it's like to have no choices. Maybe because I'm fool enough to hope. Or maybe because I saw you once at your mother's funeral, standing tall while your father fell apart, and thought, there's someone who deserves better than the hand she's been dealt. The words hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Margaret thought of the knife in her boot, of the cage she'd lived in all her life, of her sister safe with the Bradleys. But for how long she thought of this man who'd given her what no one else had. The power to choose. 1 hour, she said. Give me 1 hour to think. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. There's a sitting room off the kitchen, gets the afternoon breeze. Might be a good place for thinking. She found the room, settled into a chair that had worn soft with use, outside the window. The ranch stretched to the horizon, all that space and possibility. An hour to choose the rest of her life. An hour to decide between the devil she knew and the stranger who offered freedom. The clock on the mantel ticked away the minutes, patient as eternity. The first week at Cole Ranch passed like a fever dream. Margaret had chosen to stay, not out of love or duty, but from a curious mix of defiance and intrigue. The minister had performed a hasty ceremony, fumbling over his words while she and Ethan stood like statues, making vows that felt hollow as bird bones. Now she found herself mistress of a house that didn't feel like hers, wife to a man who treated her like a skittish horse, with patience, distance, and careful respect. Ethan had given her the large bedroom upstairs, the one with windows facing east toward the sunrise. He took the smaller room at the end of the hall, far enough away that she could almost pretend she lived alone. That first night, she'd lain awake listening for footsteps, for the turn of her doorknob, for the claiming that never came. Instead, she'd heard only the wind through the cottonwoods and the distant bawling of cattle. By the third morning, rage had replaced her confusion. She'd traded one prison for another, even if this one had prettier bars. The fury built in her chest like a summer storm, and she did what any trapped creature does. She lashed out. The china pitcher on the washstand went first, hurled against the wall in a satisfying crash. Then the mirror, spider webbing under her fist. She welcomed the sting of split knuckles, the proof that she could still feel something besides this suffocating politeness. She found Ethan in the kitchen, calmly drinking coffee as if his new wife hadn't just destroyed half the bedroom furnishings. "Feel better?" he asked, not looking up from his cup. She grabbed the nearest thing, a clay bowl, and sent it flying past his head. It shattered against the wall, raining red dust. "I hate this place," she said, breathing hard. "I hate this house. I hate you." "All right." He took another sip of coffee. "There's more dishes in the cabinet if you need them." His calm infuriated her more than anger would have. She swept an entire shelf clear, pottery exploding across the floor like fireworks. When she finished, chest heaving, he stood and fetched a broom. "I'll clean it," she said, suddenly ashamed. "No need." He began sweeping the shards into neat piles. "Sometimes things need breaking. Lord knows I've broken my share." She watched him work. This strange man who wouldn't rise to her bait. "Doesn't it make you angry, your wife acting like a wild animal?" He paused, considering. "My wife is acting like someone who's had choices taken from her all her life. Anger seems about right." That night, she found a package outside her door. Inside were new books, poetry, a novel about English society that seemed as foreign as the moon, and, surprisingly, a treatise on cattle breeding. A note in careful handwriting said simply, "The library in town orders these from Dallas. Let me know if you want others." She threw the books against the wall, but later, when sleep wouldn't come, she retrieved the poetry and read by lamplight until dawn. The days developed their own rhythm. Ethan left before sunrise to work the ranch with his hired hands. Margaret would wake to find breakfast laid out. Nothing fancy, just biscuits and preserves. Coffee kept warm on the stove. Sometimes there were notes. "Storm got into the grain again," or "rattlesnake by the well, killed it, but watch your step." She responded by breaking things. It became almost routine. Mornings she'd destroy something, a vase, a picture frame, once an entire set of shelves, and afternoons Ethan would quietly repair or replace them. They spoke in destruction and reconstruction, a language without words. The isolation was the hardest part. The ranch sat 5 miles from town, and she had no horse of her own, no way to leave unless Ethan took her. The hired hands, Miguel, Dusty, and Big Tom, kept their distance, tipping their hats when they saw her but never lingering for conversation. By the second week, she'd run out of things to break. She found Ethan in the barn one evening, mending tack by lantern light. His fingers moved with practiced ease, working oil into the leather until it gleamed. "I need to go to town," she announced. He looked up, studied her for a moment. "All right, I'll hitch the wagon in the morning." "I don't need you to take me. I need my own horse." "Can you ride?" The question pricked her pride. "Of course I can ride. Every girl in Texas can ride." "Every girl in Texas says she can ride," he corrected mildly. "Not the same thing, but there's a mare in the back corral, Buttercup, gentle as they come. She's yours if you want her." Just like that. Just like that. She turned to leave, then stopped. "Why do you make it so hard to hate you?" For the first time, she saw him truly smile. It transformed his face, revealing the younger man hidden beneath the weathered exterior. "Maybe because hate takes too much energy," he said. "And we've got a ranch to run." She started taking her meals in her room, refusing to share even that small intimacy. Ethan never commented, just left her portions covered on the stove. But one evening, she heard music drifting up from below, the soft, mournful sound of a guitar being played with uncommon skill. Margaret crept to the top of the stairs, drawn despite herself. Through the parlor doorway, she could see him in profile, lost in the music. His fingers, those same hands that worked cattle and mended leather, drew melodies from the strings that spoke of loneliness and longing, of spaces too vast to fill. She must have made a sound, because he looked up, catching her there, but he didn't stop playing. Instead, he shifted into something lighter, a dance tune she remembered from harvest festivals when she was young, before her father had drowned himself in whiskey, before her mother had faded away, before everything had turned to dust. "My mother used to sing that," she said, surprising herself by speaking. "Mine too." He let the last note fade. "Used to play for the hands on Saturday nights, back when there was more joy in this house." "When your wife was here." His laugh was soft, rueful. No, she hated the guitar, said it was common, like everything else about this place. I meant before, when I first built this ranch, when it was all possibility and no ghosts." Margaret came halfway down the stairs, caught between retreat and approach. "You could have married again. A man with your land, your money. You could have had your pick of willing women." "Willing and wanting aren't the same thing." He set the guitar aside. "I made that mistake once. Figured I'd rather be alone than repeat it." "Then why am I here?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, "Because when I saw your father drag you into that poker game like collateral, something in me rebelled. You reminded me of a wild horse I saw once, caught in a canyon. Magnificent thing, fighting against the ropes even though it was already caught. Some cowboys wanted to break her hard, teach her who was boss. But breaking something isn't the same as gentling it." "What happened to the horse?" "I bought her from them. Spent 3 months just sitting outside her corral, reading books, playing guitar. One day she walked over and ate an apple from my hand. Never put a saddle on her, though some creatures aren't meant to be ridden." Margaret felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the knot she'd carried since that wedding day. "Is that what I am to you, a wild horse to gentle?" "No." He met her eyes. "You're a woman who deserves to choose her own path. I'm just trying to give you space to figure out what that is." That night, she took supper in the kitchen while he worked on ledgers at the table. They didn't speak, but the silence was different. Less sharp, more like the quiet between lightning and thunder. Days passed. Margaret learned the rhythm of the ranch, the morning crow of the rooster, the lowing of cattle being moved to fresh pasture. She started riding Buttercup, exploring the boundaries of her new territory. The mare was indeed gentle, with a smooth gait and patient temperament. One afternoon, she rode too far and got caught in a sudden thunderstorm. By the time she made it back, she was soaked through, shivering despite the summer heat. Ethan met her at the barn, taking Buttercup's reins without a word. He threw his own jacket around her shoulders and steered her toward the house. "You'll catch your death," he said, building up the fire in the kitchen stove. "Would that be so terrible?" The words came out bitter. "Then you'd be free to find another wife, one who doesn't break your things and hide in her room." He turned from the stove, and she saw real anger in his eyes for the first time. "Don't what?" "Don't talk about dying like it's nothing." His voice was rough. "I've buried one wife already, stood by while she wasted away from misery I caused. I'll not do it again." "You didn't kill her." "Didn't I?" He turned back to the fire. "I took a girl who dreamed of city lights and stuck her in the middle of nowhere. Watched her fade like flowers in drought. When the sickness took her, I think she was almost grateful." Margaret pulled his jacket tighter. It smelled of leather and wood smoke, of honest work. "I'm not her." "No," he agreed. You're stronger, but strength can be its own kind of curse when you're trapped." That night, she found a new package outside her door. Not books this time, but a set of riding clothes, split skirt, practical boots, a hat to keep the sun off. Things chosen for function, not fashion. Things that said ride far, ride free, but come back safe. She tried them on, marveling at the fit. He must have guessed her measurements, or maybe asked the seamstress in town. The boots were soft as butter, already broken in. The hat sat just right. When she came down to breakfast, wearing her new clothes, Ethan glanced up from his coffee and nodded once. "Suits you." "Thank you." The words felt strange in her mouth, but necessary. "There's a canyon about 10 miles north," he said. "Good place to water the horse, watch the hawks. Might be worth seeing." She took it for the gift it was, not just directions, but trust. He was telling her she could ride out alone, explore, be something other than a wife waiting in an empty house. "Will you show me?" The question surprised them both. He set down his cup carefully. "If you'd like." They rode out together as the morning cooled into bearable. Ethan on his big bay gelding, Margaret on Buttercup, picking their way through scrub and stone. He didn't fill the silence with chatter, but occasionally pointed out landmarks, a lightning-struck tree, a dried creek bed that would flood come spring, the distant smudge of mountains that marked the edge of his land. The canyon, when they reached it, took her breath away. Red rock walls rose like church spires, and a spring-fed pool reflected the endless sky. Hawks circled overhead, their cries echoing off stone. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "First thing I found when I claimed this land." Ethan dismounted, loosening his horse's girth. "Knew if I had water like this, I could make something grow." They sat in the shade of a cottonwood, passing a canteen between them. Margaret watched the hawks wheel and dive, masters of their element. "I still don't understand," she said finally. "Why you paid my father's debt. Why you married me, but don't act like a husband." He was quiet long enough that she wondered if he'd answer. When he spoke, his voice was careful, feeling for the right words. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be owned," he said. "My father inked my papers to the army when I was 15. Told me it would make a man of me. 4 years of taking orders, killing because someone pointed and said, 'enemy.' When I got out, I swore I'd never own another person or be owned again. But you married me. A piece of paper doesn't make a marriage." He turned to look at her. "Any more than a cage makes a songbird sing. You're free to fly whenever you choose. Margaret, I just hope maybe you'll choose to stay." The ride back was quiet, but it was a different quiet than before. That night, she took supper in the kitchen again. Ethan played his guitar while she mended one of the shirts she'd found in the wash. Domestic, but not confined. As the weeks passed, she broke fewer things, started helping with small chores, gathering eggs, feeding the chickens, tending the kitchen garden that had gone wild with neglect. The hired hands began to nod and smile when they saw her, and Big Tom even touched his hat brim in genuine respect when she brought water out to them during the hottest part of the day. One evening, as purple dusk painted the sky, she found Ethan on the porch, guitar in hand but not playing. She sat beside him on the steps, careful to leave space between them. "Play something," she said. He strummed a few experimental chords, then launched into a melody she didn't recognize. It was beautiful and sad and somehow hopeful all at once. His fingers drew music from the strings like water from a well, and Margaret closed her eyes, letting it wash over her. When the last note faded, she opened her eyes to find him watching her. The sunset turned his eyes from gray to gold, and for a moment she saw him not as her jailer or savior, but simply as a man who'd known too much loneliness. "Teach me," she said impulsively. "To play, I mean." Something softened in his face. "If you'd like." He handed her the guitar, showing her how to hold it, how to press the strings to make a clean note. Her fingers were clumsy, the sounds discordant, but he was patient, adjusting her grip, demonstrating again and again. "You have to be gentle," he said, his hand covering hers on the neck of the guitar, "but firm, like holding something precious that might fly away." Their eyes met over the instrument, and Margaret felt something flutter in her chest. Not love, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it, like seeds in drought-hard ground, waiting for rain. The morning came crisp and bright, with the kind of clarity that only follows a night storm. Margaret woke to find a note slipped under her door. "Important ride today. Meet me at the barn after breakfast if you're willing. E." She dressed in her riding clothes, curiosity pricking at her like cactus needles. Over the past month, she and Ethan had settled into an odd rhythm. Not quite marriage, not quite friendship, but something in between. He still gave her space, still treated her with that careful respect that both soothed and frustrated her. At the barn, she found him saddling both horses, his movements efficient and purposeful. Storm was there too, the once wild mare now following him around like a devoted dog. "Where are we going?" Margaret asked. accepting Buttercup's reins. "North," he said simply. "There's something you need to see." They rode in companionable silence for the first hour, the landscape gradually changing from scrubland to rockier terrain. Margaret had grown comfortable with these silences, no longer feeling the need to fill them with words. Ethan had taught her that quiet could be its own form of communication. As they climbed higher into the hill country, he began to speak. "Been thinking about promises lately, the ones we make, the ones made for us. And figure everyone deserves the chance to choose their promises." He guided his horse around a fallen log. Not have them chosen by others. The trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file. Margaret followed, wondering at this philosophical turn. Ethan wasn't given to abstract conversations unless something weighed on his mind. They emerged onto a plateau that made her gasp. Before them, the land spread out like a map. She could see the ranch, tiny in the distance, the town of Dry Creek beyond. And farther still, the snake-like curve of the railroad that connected them to the wider world. But it wasn't the view that caught her attention. It was the crossroads. Two trails met here on the plateau. One led back the way they'd come, toward the ranch. The other headed west toward the railroad junction, where a person could catch a train to anywhere. California, Denver, even back east if they had a mind to. Ethan dismounted, ground-tying his horse. Margaret did the same, her heart beginning to pound as understanding dawned. "The Western Trail leads to Millerville," he said, pulling a leather pouch from his saddlebag. "Train comes through twice a week. This is enough for a ticket anywhere you want to go, plus room and board for a month once you get there." He set the pouch on a flat rock between them. The morning sun caught the leather, turned it gold. "I don't understand," Margaret said, though she was beginning to. "Yes, you do." His gray eyes were steady, serious. "You've been here 6 weeks. Long enough to know this life, what it offers and what it doesn't. I brought you here to give you what I couldn't that first day, a real choice." "You're setting me free," the words came out strangled. "You were always free. I'm just making sure you know it." He gestured to the trails. "One path takes you back to the ranch. The other takes you anywhere else. I won't follow whichever you choose. Won't send anyone after you. You'll have my name for protection if you need it. Money to start fresh." Margaret stared at him, this impossible man who kept confounding her expectations. "And if I go, what will you tell people?" "The truth, that you chose your own path. Let them make of it what they will. They'll say I ran off like your first wife, that you're cursed, can't keep a woman." A slight smile touched his lips. "Wouldn't be far wrong, would it? But I'd rather be thought a fool than a jailer." The wind picked up, stirring dust devils across the plateau. Margaret walked to the edge, looking out at all that space, all that possibility. Freedom spread before her like a feast after famine. "Why now?" she asked. "Why today?" "Because yesterday you laughed." His voice was soft. "First time I've heard it. Made me realize you might be starting to make peace with this place, and I couldn't let you mistake resignation for choosing. If you stay, I need to know it's because you want to, not because you've given up on wanting." She turned to face him, this weathered man with his unexpected depths. "And if I choose the ranch, then we go on as we have. You're my wife-in-law, but not in chains. Share the house, the work if you want it, the quiet evenings, maybe someday more. If that's ever your choosing, but not today. Today is just about the path." Margaret picked up the pouch, weighed it in her hands. It was heavy enough to truly start over. She thought of Dry Creek, of her father's house with its violence and desperation. Thought of her sister Lily, safe for now with the Bradleys, but for how long? Thought of the cities she'd dreamed of, where women could work in shops or schools, where no one knew their history. Then she thought of the ranch, the morning light through her bedroom windows, the satisfaction of gathering eggs still warm from the hens, The way Buttercup whickered when she approached. Thought of Ethan's guitar in the evening. His quiet presence that demanded nothing but offered everything. "What if I choose wrong?" she asked. "No wrong choice when it's freely made. Only different paths to different lives." She walked back to the crossroads, standing exactly where the trails diverged. East to the ranch, west to the world. The money pouch felt like a stone in her hands, heavy with possibility. "Tell me about the Western Trail," she said. "How long to Millerville?" 3 hours' ride. There's a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Garrett. Clean, respectable. She'd help you find your feet. And you've thought of everything. Tried to. Wanted it to be real, not just words. Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the sun on her face, the wind in her hair. For the first time in her 18 years, she stood at a crossroads of her own making. No father selling her. No duty binding her. No shame driving her. Just choice. Pure and simple. She thought of her mother, married at 16 to a man she'd barely met. Dead at 35 without ever seeing the ocean she'd dreamed of. Thought of Ethan's first wife, withering away from homesickness and crushed dreams. Thought of all the women who'd never stood where she stood now, with the power to choose their own destiny. When she opened her eyes, Ethan had moved back to the horses, giving her privacy for this moment. He stood with his back to her, one hand on his gelding's neck, the picture of patience. She realized he would wait all day if needed, would camp here under the stars if that's what it took for her to choose freely. That decided her. Margaret walked to Buttercup, tucked the money pouch into the saddlebag, and swung up into the saddle. Ethan turned at the movement, his face carefully neutral. "Well then," he said quietly. She guided Buttercup to the crossroads, paused for one last moment, then turned the mare's head toward the eastern trail, back toward the ranch, back toward the life she'd been thrust into but was now choosing. Ethan mounted his horse in silence. As they started down the trail, he finally spoke. "You're sure?" "No," Margaret said honestly. "But I'm curious. About the ranch, about the life we might build, about you. And I'd rather choose curiosity than safety." They rode for a few minutes before she added, "But I'm keeping the money." His laugh was sudden and genuine. "Fair enough. Consider it yours. A woman should always have the means to leave if she needs to." "You're a strange man, Ethan Cole." "So I've been told." As they descended back toward the ranch, Margaret felt something fundamental shift inside her. The walls were the same, but they were no longer prison walls. The ring on her finger was the same, but it no longer felt like a shackle. Everything was the same. But she was different. She had chosen. "There's something else," Ethan said as the ranch buildings came into view. "A letter came yesterday. From the Bradleys." Margaret's heart clenched. "Lily." "She's fine. But your father's been coming around, talking about needing her back. Tom Bradley's worried." "We have to." "Already sent Miguel to town with a message. Told Tom to bring her here if needed. This ranch is big enough, and she's your sister. But I wanted you to choose your own path first, without that weight on the decision." Margaret reined Buttercup to a stop. "You'd take in my sister even if I'd chosen to leave. Your leaving wouldn't change her need for safety. I've got empty rooms and plenty of work. She'd be welcome either way." Something cracked open in Margaret's chest, a warmth spreading through the cold places. "That's why you chose today, before she might arrive, so I couldn't mistake duty to her for choosing you." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. "Figured you'd had enough of others making your choices. Didn't want to be another weight on the scales." They reached the ranch as the sun hit its zenith. The hired hands were bringing in a string of horses from the far pasture, dust rising golden in the light. It was a scene she'd watched dozens of times, but now it looked different, like home, maybe, or at least the possibility of home. As they unsaddled the horses, working side by side in comfortable rhythm, Margaret found herself thinking about the crossroads. In all the stories she'd read, Choosing a path meant leaving the other behind forever. But standing there, she'd realized something different. Choosing to stay wasn't closing a door. It was opening one. To what? She didn't know yet. But for the first time in her life, she was eager to find out. "Thank you," she said as they hung up the saddles. "For today. For the choice." "Thank you," he replied, "for choosing to come back." That evening, she took supper with him in the kitchen, their new routine. But when he reached for his guitar, she stopped him. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "The plans you have, the dreams. If I'm choosing this life, I want to understand it." His eyes lit up, and he began to talk about breeding programs for the cattle, about the new windmills that could pull water from deep wells, about the contracts with the army posts that could make them prosperous. His hands moved as he spoke, sketching possibilities in the air, and Margaret found herself leaning in, caught by his vision. "We could build a real operation here," he said. "Something that lasts. Something meaningful." "We," she repeated softly. He caught himself. "I mean, if you're interested, if you want to be part of it." "I chose to come back," she reminded him. "That means choosing all of it. Teach me what I need to know." "You sure you want that cattle business isn't exactly ladies' work?" According to most. Margaret thought of the crossroads, of the train that could have carried her to a proper city with proper ladies' work. "Good thing I'm not most ladies." This time his smile was full and unguarded. "No, Margaret Rose, you surely are not." Later, as she prepared for bed, Margaret found herself at the window, looking out at the land that was now hers by choice rather than circumstance. Somewhere out there was the crossroads. Waiting. It would always be there. She realized. Ethan had given her that. Not just one moment of choice, but the knowledge that choice was always possible. She'd thought freedom meant leaving, but maybe it meant something else. Maybe it meant staying because you wanted to, building because you chose to, loving because your heart moved you to it and not because anyone demanded it. Tomorrow, Lily might arrive, bringing new complications. Tomorrow, there would be work and challenges and all the hardness of ranch life. But tonight, Margaret Cole, and how strange to think of herself with that name by choice, now stood at her window and felt the chains she'd carried all her life fall away. She'd stood at the crossroads and chosen her path, and for the first time in her life, the road ahead looked like adventure rather than sentence. The evening had grown soft and purple when Margaret heard the sound of wagon wheels on the ranch road. She and Ethan sat on the porch, him working on ledgers while she mended one of his work shirts. The domestic scene felt both foreign and oddly right, like wearing new boots that hadn't quite shaped to her feet yet. "That'll be Tom Bradley," Ethan said, setting aside his papers. "With your sister, most likely." Margaret's needle stilled. In the 2 days since the crossroads, she'd tried to prepare herself for this moment. Lily was 14 now, still more child than woman, still young enough to be saved from their father's schemes. The wagon rolled into view, and there she was, small and golden-haired where Margaret was tall and dark, but with the same stubborn chin, the same wary eyes that had learned too young to watch for danger. Maggie, Lily, tumbled from the wagon before it fully stopped, racing toward the porch. Margaret barely had time to set aside her mending before her sister collided with her, thin arms wrapped tight around her waist. "Hello, little bird," Margaret murmured, using the pet name from their childhood, over Lily's head. She saw Tom Bradley climbing down, his weathered face grave. "Evening, Mrs. Cole, Ethan." Tom touched his hat. "Sorry to impose, but things got complicated in town." "No imposition," Ethan said, standing. "Why don't you come in? Tom, I'll pour you a drink while the girls catch up." The men disappeared inside, leaving Margaret holding her trembling sister. She guided Lily to the porch steps, sitting close enough to maintain the embrace. "What happened?" she asked gently. Papa came to the Bradleys drunk as a skunk, Lily said, her voice muffled against Margaret's shoulder. Said he'd made a deal with Mr. Sawyer. You remember him? The horse trader with the missing teeth who smells like rot. Margaret's blood turned cold. Jeremiah Sawyer was 40 if he was a day, with a reputation for rough handling of everything he owned, horses and wives alike. Said I was to marry him next week. Lily continued. Papa already took his money. Spent most of it at the saloon that same night. She pulled back, eyes swimming with tears. Mrs. Bradley hid me in the root cellar, but Papa said he'd be back with the sheriff if they didn't produce me. That's when Mr. Cole's man arrived. Miguel. Yes, he had a letter from Mr. Cole. Said you wanted me here. Is that true, Maggie? Do you want me? Margaret cupped her sister's face, thumbs wiping away tears. More than anything, little bird. This is your home now if you want it. But what about Mr. Cole? Won't he mind? Let's ask him. They found the men in Ethan's study, Tom Bradley looking uncomfortable amid the books and ledgers. Ethan glanced up as they entered, his eyes going straight to Lily. Miss Lily, he said formally, standing. Welcome to the Cole Ranch. I understand you've had some trouble. Lily, usually bold as brass, went shy in the face of his grave courtesy. Yes, sir. I'm sorry to be a burden. Family's never a burden, he said simply. Margaret's sister is my sister. You'll have the room next to hers, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. But Papa. Your father has no claim here. His voice took on an edge. This ranch is mine, and everyone on it is under my protection. That includes you. If you choose to stay. The word choose rang in the air like a bell. Margaret saw Lily straighten, some of the fear leaving her face. I choose to stay, she said firmly, if you'll have me. Then it's settled. Ethan turned to Tom. I'll handle Samuel Quinn and Sawyer both. You've done right by the girl. Tom, I won't forget it. After Tom left with promises to send Lily's few belongings, Ethan showed them to what would be Lily's room. It was smaller than Margaret's, but comfortable, with a window overlooking the kitchen garden. It's perfect, Lily breathed, running her hand over the quilt. My own room? Imagine that. Later, as Margaret helped her sister settle in, Lily asked, Is he kind to you, Mr. Cole? People in town say things. What things? That his first wife ran off? That he's cold as winter ground? That you must be miserable out here? Margaret considered her answer. He's the first man who ever gave me a choice. That's worth more than all the sweet words in the world. Do you love him? The question hung in the air like dust motes in lamplight. Did she? Not yet, perhaps. But there was something there. Respect, certainly. Growing affection. The seed of possibility. I'm learning too, she said finally. Love isn't always lightning strikes and poetry. Sometimes it's choosing to stay and see what grows. The next morning brought exactly the trouble Ethan had predicted. Margaret was teaching Lily to gather eggs when they heard horses approaching fast. Through the kitchen window, she saw her father and Jeremiah Sawyer, accompanied by Sheriff Watson. Stay inside, she told Lily, but her sister grabbed her arm. Don't let them take me, Maggie, please. Never. Ethan emerged from the barn as the men dismounted, his movements unhurried. Miguel and Big Tom flanked him, hands resting casual near their guns. The morning air crackled with tension. Cole, Sheriff Watson said, clearly uncomfortable. I'm here on official business. Mr. Quinn says you're harboring his daughter without permission. Both his daughters are here legally. Ethan replied, One is my wife, one is our ward. She ain't your ward, Samuel Quinn spat, whiskey fumes visible even from the porch. She's mine to do with as I please, and I've promised her to Sawyer here. For $30 and a mule, Sawyer added with a gap-toothed grin. Already paid in full. Margaret felt sick. Her sister's future traded for drinking money and livestock. Ethan studied them with those gray eyes that gave away nothing. Sheriff, you know as well as I do that selling children isn't legal. Even in Texas, when whatever money changed hands, it wasn't for anything lawful. Now see here, Samuel started, but Ethan cut him off. Furthermore, I have here a document drawn up by Judge Martinez, granting me and my wife temporary custody of Lily Quinn, based on evidence of neglect and attempted trafficking of a minor. He pulled a paper from his shirt pocket. Margaret blinked. When had he managed that? Sheriff Watson read it, relief crossing his face. Looks legal to me. Sorry, Quinn, but the girl stays here. And Sawyer, I'd think real hard before pursuing any claims. Buying children is a hanging offense in some parts. This ain't over, Samuel raged. That's my daughter, my property. That's when Margaret stepped onto the porch, Lily beside her. I am no one's property, she said clearly. And neither is she. You lost any claim to us the day you put us up as collateral. You watch your tongue, girl. Or what? Ethan's voice was soft, dangerous. You'll try to sell her too, make threats on my land, against my family. Choose your next words very carefully. Quinn. The threat hung implicit in the air. Samuel Quinn might be a drunk and a bully, but he wasn't entirely stupid. He knew Ethan Cole's reputation, fair but implacable, and deadly accurate with a gun when pushed. You've poisoned them against me, he muttered, but the fight was leaving him. Turned my own blood contrary. No, Margaret said. You did that all on your own. Sheriff Watson cleared his throat. Best we head back to town. Quinn, Sawyer, you're done here. As they mounted up, Sawyer shot one last look at Lily. Pretty little thing. Shame to waste her on books and women's notions. Sawyer. Ethan's voice stopped him. If I see you within 10 miles of this ranch, I'll assume you're here to rustle cattle, and we hang rustlers in these parts. The message was clear. Sawyer paled, spurring his horse harder than necessary. They watched until the dust settled. Then Ethan turned to the sisters. Well, he said mildly, that's done. How about some breakfast? The casual dismissal of danger broke the tension. Lily laughed, high and nervous, while Margaret felt her knees go weak with relief. Over breakfast, Ethan outlined his plans. You'll need schooling, he told Lily. Mrs. Henderson in town teaches young ladies. Reading, writing, proper arithmetic, maybe some music if you're inclined. You'd send me to school. Lily's eyes went wide. Papa always said schooling was wasted on girls. Your papa says a lot of fool things. Education's never wasted on anyone with the wit to use it. He glanced at Margaret. Your sister's been helping with the ranch books. Has a good head for numbers. Margaret flushed at the praise. She'd started reviewing the ledgers out of boredom, but found she enjoyed the precision of it, the way numbers told the story of the ranch's success or struggle. Could I learn that too? Lily asked eagerly. Don't see why not. Ranch this size needs all the smart heads it can get. That afternoon, while Lily explored her new home, Margaret found herself alone with Ethan in his study. He was writing letters to Judge Martinez, she guessed, and perhaps to Mrs. Henderson about school. Thank you, she said, for Lily, for everything. He set down his pen. No need for thanks. Said she was family, meant it. Still, you could have refused. Could have sent her back. Could have. He leaned back in his chair. But then I'd have to look at you across the breakfast table, knowing I'd condemned your sister to Sawyer's hands. Rather face a dozen angry fathers than that. Something warm bloomed in Margaret's chest. You're not the cold man they say you are. Aren't I? He smiled slightly. Maybe you're thawing me out. The words hung between them, charged with possibility. Margaret moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. When did you arrange things with the judge? She asked. The day I sent Miguel to town. Figured there might be legal troubles. Wanted to be prepared. You think of everything. Try to. Failed once before by not thinking ahead. Don't aim to repeat it. She knew he meant his first wife, the girl who'd withered here, but Margaret wasn't that girl. Each day she felt herself growing stronger, more sure of her place. The ranch was becoming home, and this man. Ethan? She said softly. He looked up at her use of his name without the formal, Mr. Cole. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes. I'm glad I chose to stay, she said. Glad I chose you. He stood slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might spook her. They were close now, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, the faint scar on his jaw from some long-ago fight. Margaret, he said, her name a question and answer both. She answered by reaching up, touching that scar with gentle fingers. He caught her hand, held it against his cheek. I'm not an easy man, he warned, set in my ways, more comfortable with cattle than people most days. I'm not looking for easy, she replied. Easy is for other women. I'm looking for true. He studied her face like he was memorizing it, then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was nothing like she'd imagined her first kiss would be. No desperate passion or sweeping romance. Instead, it was gentle, careful. A question asked and answered in the space of a heartbeat. His lips were surprisingly soft, tasting faintly of coffee and possibility. When they parted, Margaret felt changed, as if the world had shifted on its axis while she wasn't looking. Well, she said, suddenly shy. Well, he agreed, thumb stroking over her knuckles. A crash from somewhere in the house broke the moment. Lily, probably exploring places she shouldn't. They jumped apart like guilty children, then laughed at themselves. I should check on her, Margaret said. Probably wise. Girl's got your curiosity. Likely to find every secret in this house before supper. As she turned to go, he caught her hand once more. Margaret, we'll go slow as you need. No expectations, no demands. Your choices always. She squeezed his fingers. I know. That's why I can choose you. She found Lily in the attic, dust motes dancing around her as she explored trunks and boxes. Look what I found. Lily held up a photograph. Is this Mr. Cole when he was young? Margaret studied the image, a younger Ethan in uniform, unsmiling but with a vulnerability in his eyes that the years had hidden. Army picture, she said, from the war. He looks sad. I think he was, but he's different now. Lily tilted her head, studying her sister. You're different too, happier, despite everything with Papa. I'm happy, Margaret realized with surprise. For the first time in so long, I actually am. That evening, they ate supper as a strange new family. Ethan at the head of the table, Margaret to his right, Lily chattering away about everything she'd discovered. The girl had already charmed Miguel with her terrible Spanish and convinced Big Tom to teach her to rope. She's going to run wild here, Margaret warned. Good, Ethan said. Wild things grow strong. Long as she's got good roots, she'll be fine. After Lily went to bed, exhausted from the day's adventures, Margaret and Ethan sat on the porch. She'd brought out the shirt she was mending. He had his ledgers, but neither worked. Instead, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Thank you for telling me, she said eventually, about your past, your first marriage. Figured you had a right to know what kind of man you'd married. A good one, she said firmly. One who learns from his mistakes, one who gives people choices. He reached over, took her hand. Such a simple gesture, but it felt like a promise. Play something, she requested, something hopeful. He fetched his guitar, tuned it carefully, then began to play. The melody was new, something she hadn't heard before, sweet and tentative, like spring after a hard winter. What's that called? She asked when he finished. Doesn't have a name yet, Been working on it since you came back from the crossroads. Margaret's choice. She suggested, that's what you should call it. He smiled, started playing again. This time she hummed along, finding the harmony. Their voices blended in the darkness, and Margaret thought this might be what home sounded like. Not a place, but a feeling, built note by note, choice by choice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Her father wouldn't give up easily. Sawyer might cause trouble. There was a ranch to run, a sister to raise, a marriage to figure out. But tonight, with Ethan's fingers on the guitar strings and her sister safe upstairs, Margaret Cole felt the solid ground of a life chosen rather than endured. The music carried on the night air, past the barns and corrals, out to where the land met the endless Texas sky. And in that music was a promise that some prisons were really sanctuaries, that some chains were really anchors, and that sometimes, if you were very lucky, staying still was the greatest freedom of all. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, carried by a dusty rider who didn't stay for water. Margaret found it tucked under the kitchen door where someone had slid it during the pre-dawn hours. The paper was cheap, the handwriting barely legible, but the message was clear. Your sister Sarah, age 12, will marry Harold Briggs next Sunday. Already paid. Come if you want to say goodbye. S.Q. Margaret's hands shook as she read it. Sarah, their youngest sister, still living with cousins in the next county. She'd thought Sarah was safe there, forgotten by their father in his whiskey-soaked schemes. What is it? Lily appeared in the doorway, still in her nightdress. Margaret wordlessly handed her the letter. Lily's face went white as she read. Sarah's only 12, Lily whispered. She still plays with dolls. Not anymore, apparently. Margaret's voice was hard as flint. Get dressed. We're going to town. She found Ethan in the barn, helping Big Tom doctor a lame horse. He took one look at her face and straightened. What's happened? She showed him the letter. His expression darkened as he read, a muscle jumping in his jaw. Harold Briggs, he said quietly. Owns the freight company, must be 50 years old. And buying children, apparently. Margaret's voice shook with fury. We have to stop this. We will. He handed the letter back. Tom, saddle the horses. Miguel, find Dusty and tell him we're riding to town. Full armed. Within an hour, they were mounted and ready. Margaret had changed into her riding clothes, the knife tucked in her boot. Lily insisted on coming despite Margaret's protests. She's my sister too, Lily said stubbornly. I'm going. Ethan settled it. She rides with me, safer than leaving her here alone. They made an odd procession heading into Dry Creek, Ethan and Lily on his big bay, Margaret on Buttercup, the 3 ranch hands flanking them like an honor guard, or a war party. The town was bustling with its usual morning business, but people stopped to stare as they passed. Word traveled fast in a place like Dry Creek. By the time they reached the saloon, a crowd had gathered. Samuel Quinn sat at his usual table, a bottle already half empty beside him. Harold Briggs occupied the chair across from him, counting out bills with thick fingers. They both looked up as Ethan pushed through the doors, Margaret right behind him. Well, well, Samuel slurred. Come to wish Sarah happy nuptials. Come to stop you selling another daughter, Margaret said. Where is she? Safe and sound, being fitted for her wedding dress as we speak. Briggs smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Don't worry, I'll take good care of her. Got a nice room already above the freight office. Margaret moved before anyone could stop her. The knife was in her hand and slamming into the table between Briggs's splayed fingers, missing his pinky by a hair's breadth. You touch her, and I'll make you regret having hands, she hissed. The saloon went dead silent. Briggs jerked back, face purpling. You crazy witch sheriff! This woman threatened me. Sheriff Watson, who'd been nursing a beer at the bar. sighed heavily. Now, Mrs. Cole, you can't go throwing knives at people, even if they deserve it. He's buying a 12-year-old child, Margaret said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. My baby sister. For what purpose? Mr. Briggs. What does a 50-year-old man want with a little girl? Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some of these people had daughters of their own. It's a legal arrangement, Briggs blustered. Her father agreed. Her father's a drunk who'd sell his own soul for whiskey money, Ethan cut in. And you're a man who knows better, taking advantage of it. This ain't your business, Cole. My wife's family is my business. Ethan's voice was soft, dangerous. And I'm making you an offer. Whatever you paid Quinn, I'll double it. You tear up whatever paper you think makes this legal, and we all walk away. And if I don't? Ethan smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Then we have a problem. See, your freight wagons cross my land twice a week heading to Fort Worth. Been thinking I might need to charge a toll. Or maybe my cattle might get spooked. Stampede right through your wagon trains. Accidents happen in rough country. The threat was clear. Briggs might own a freight company, but Ethan Cole controlled some of the best grazing land and water rights in 3 counties. He could make Briggs's business very difficult indeed. Now hold on, Sheriff Watson intervened. No need for anyone to make threats. No threat, Ethan said mildly. Just thinking out loud about property rights. Margaret pulled the knife from the table, wiping it on her skirt. Where's Sarah? Ain't telling you nothing, Samuel spat. You got no right. I've got every right. She leaned over the table, close enough to smell the whiskey fumes. I'm her sister, and unlike you, I actually care if she lives or dies. Mrs. Henderson has her. Someone called from the crowd. Saw her take the girl to the schoolhouse. Margaret turned to see Tom Bradley in the doorway. Thought you might want to know. Mrs. Henderson said she wasn't letting any child get married on her watch, law or no law. Relief flooded through Margaret. Mrs. Henderson, the school teacher, was a formidable woman who'd faced down everyone from cattle barons to desperados. Sarah was safe, for now. This ain't over, Briggs growled, but he was already calculating. The mood of the crowd had turned against him. Some things, even in a rough town like Dry Creek, weren't acceptable. I want my money back, Quinn. Spent it already, Samuel mumbled. Then we got a problem. I'll cover it. Ethan interrupted. The full amount? You give me a bill of sale stating you have no claim on Sarah Quinn, and I'll pay what he owes. Briggs hesitated, greed warring with pride. Greed won. Fine, but I want it in writing that Cole Ranch won't interfere with my freight lines. Done. They conducted the business right there in the saloon. Sheriff Watson serving as witness. Money changed hands. Papers were signed. Margaret noticed her father wouldn't meet her eyes as he scratched his mark on the document. There, Ethan said when it was finished. Sarah Quinn is now under the protection of Cole Ranch. Anyone who has issue with that can take it up with me. He turned to Samuel. As for you, Quinn, this is the last daughter you'll sell. Try it again, and I'll see you brought up on charges. There's still some justice in Texas, even for men like you. They found Sarah at the schoolhouse, a thin girl with Margaret's dark hair and their mother's gentle eyes. She flew into Margaret's arms, sobbing with relief. I thought I'd have to run away, she whispered. Like Mary Patterson did last year, but Mrs. Henderson said you'd come. Always, Margaret promised, holding her tight. You're safe now. Little one, you're coming home with us. Mrs. Henderson, a steel-haired woman in her 50s, nodded approvingly. About time someone stood up to the likes of Briggs and Quinn. That child's been half-starved at those cousins' house. Nothing but skin and bones. As they prepared to leave, the crowd parting respectfully, Margaret noticed something had shifted. Women who'd previously avoided her eye now nodded in acknowledgement. Men touched their hats with genuine respect rather than mockery. Even Sheriff Watson managed gruff approval. "You did good today," he told Ethan. "Town's been turning a blind eye too long." On the ride home, Sarah rode with Lily on a gentle mare Miguel had brought, the two younger girls already chattering like magpies. Margaret rode beside Ethan, processing the morning's events. "That was a lot of money," she said quietly. "Worth it. We can't save every girl whose father tries to sell her." "No," he agreed. "But we saved yours. That's enough for today." She studied his profile. This man who kept surprising her. "Why do you care so much?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Had a sister once, younger than me. Pretty little thing, full of dreams. Our father was a hard man, drank too much, hit too often. When she was 15, he promised her to a man 3 times her age to settle a debt." "What happened?" "She ran, made it as far as the river before the cold got her. Found her 3 days later, frozen." His voice was steady, but she heard the old pain beneath. "I was away at war, couldn't protect her. Swore if I ever had the chance to stop it happening to another girl, I would." Margaret reached over, touched his hand where it rested on the saddle horn. "She would be proud, what you did today." "Maybe?" He turned his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Your father won't stop. You know, men like him never do until someone stops them permanent." "I know." They rode in silence for a while, hands linked across the space between horses. Behind them, Lily was teaching Sarah the ranch songs Miguel had taught her. Their young voices brightened the morning air. "3 daughters now," Ethan said eventually. "Going to need a bigger kitchen table." "You don't mind, it's a lot to take on. Family's never too much. Besides, ranch this size needs plenty of hands. They can learn the business, help with the books, build something lasting." "A dynasty of ranch women," Margaret smiled at the thought. "Why not already got one who can throw a knife better than most cowboys can shoot? Lily's showing a real hand with the horses. Sarah strikes me as the studious type. Give them education and opportunity. No telling what they might do." As they crested the hill and the ranch spread before them, Margaret felt something settle in her chest. This was home now, not just for her, but for her sisters. A place where girls could grow strong and safe, where they could learn to ride and rope and read, where no one would ever sell them like cattle. "There's something else," Ethan said as they approached the barn. "Been thinking about it for a while, but today clinched it. I want to make it official. Adopt your sisters legal and proper. Give them the Cole name, full inheritance rights. Make sure there's no question about their protection." Margaret pulled Buttercup to a stop, staring at him. "You'd do that." "They're your family, which makes them mine. Seems only right to make it legal." He met her gaze steadily. "If you're agreeable." "Agreeable," she laughed, feeling tears prick her eyes. "Ethan Cole, you impossible man. Yes, I'm agreeable." That evening, as they sat around the newly crowded kitchen table, Margaret watched her sisters bloom under Ethan's quiet acceptance. Sarah, shy at first, slowly opened up when he asked about her favorite subjects in school. Lily regaled them with her plans to learn trick riding from Miguel. After dinner, Ethan brought out his guitar. "Might as well start them right," he said. "Music's as important as reading on a ranch. Keeps the cattle calm, the hands happy." As he played, teaching the younger girls simple melodies, Margaret stepped out onto the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. From inside came the sound of laughter, of family, of home. She thought about Harold Briggs and his thick fingers counting money, about her father, lost to whiskey and bitterness, about all the girls who weren't as lucky as her sisters. The anger was still there, burning low and steady. But alongside it was something else, purpose. "We'll need to be careful," Ethan said, joining her on the porch. "Your father might try something desperate, and Briggs won't forget the humiliation." "Let them come," Margaret said fiercely. "They'll find out what happens when you corner a Cole woman." He smiled at that, at her claiming of his name like armor. "That they will, though I pity the fool who tries." From inside, Lily called, "Maggie, come sing with us." Margaret looked at Ethan, at this man who'd given her and her sisters more than safety. He'd given them dignity, choice, a future. The crossroads seemed like a lifetime ago now. She'd chosen to stay, and every day that choice bore new fruit. "Coming," she called back. Then to Ethan, "You know what this means, don't you? A house full of women. You'll be outnumbered." "Already am," he said comfortably. Wouldn't have it any other way. As they went back inside to join the music, Margaret thought about the letter that had started this day, meant as a taunt, a final cruelty from a father lost to darkness. Instead, it had become something else, a catalyst, a calling, a chance to build something better from the ashes of what had been. The Cole Ranch had always been known for its cattle, its water rights, its prosperity. Now it would be known for something more, as a place where girls could grow into women on their own terms, where family meant choice rather than blood, where the future was as wide open as the Texas sky. And, at the heart of it all, a man who understood that true strength meant lifting others up, and a woman who was learning that love could be both fierce and gentle, both freedom and anchor, both the question and the answer in the endless conversation between two hearts finding their way home. The morning came with the acrid smell of smoke on the wind. Margaret woke to find Ethan's side of the bed empty. They'd been sharing a room for 2 weeks now, though he still kept carefully to his side, never presuming. She heard urgent voices from the yard and dressed quickly. Outside, she found chaos. Miguel was leading horses from the barn while Big Tom and Dusty hauled water buckets. In the distance, a column of black smoke rose from the direction of town. "What's happening?" she asked Ethan, who stood on the porch buckling on his gun belt. "Fire at the land office," he said grimly. "Where they keep all the deeds and claims. Mighty convenient for some folks if those records burn." Margaret's blood ran cold. Without legal documents, land ownership reverted to whoever could hold it by force, and she had a sick feeling she knew who might benefit from such chaos. "Stay here with your sisters," Ethan said, checking his rifle. "Keep the shotgun handy. If anyone comes who isn't one of ours, don't let them pass the gate." "I'm coming with you." "Margaret, those documents include the papers making my sisters your legal wards. Without them, my father could claim them again." She met his eyes steadily. "I'm coming." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Can you shoot?" "Papa may have been worthless, but he taught us to handle a gun. Probably the only useful thing he ever did." "Miguel, you're with us. Tom, Dusty, guard the house. Anyone tries anything with those girls." "We'll handle it, boss," Big Tom said firmly. They rode hard toward town, the smoke growing thicker as they approached. The land office was fully engulfed, orange flames licking at the sky, while a bucket brigade tried futilely to save it. Half the town had turned out to help or gawk. Sheriff Watson stood near the inferno, his face grim. "Started about an hour ago," he told Ethan. "Guard was knocked unconscious. By the time anyone noticed, it was too late." "Anybody hurt?" "Just the guard. Doc says he'll be fine." Margaret scanned the crowd and spotted her father near the saloon, trying to look concerned but unable to hide his satisfaction. Harold Briggs stood beside him, and they were deep in conversation. "I need to get to the bank," Ethan said quietly. "I keep copies of the important papers in their safe. But if someone's orchestrating this..." He didn't need to finish. If someone wanted those documents destroyed badly enough to commit arson, they might not stop there. They made their way through the crowd, Margaret's hand near the pistol Ethan had insisted she carry. The bank was still intact, but a crowd had gathered outside. Angry voices demanding their money, fearing the worst. "Stand aside," Ethan's voice cut through the noise like a whip. "Let us through!" The banker, Mr. Pritchard, looked relieved to see them. "Cole. Thank God. These people think we're next. I've tried telling them." "Open the safe," Ethan said. "I need my documents. Now!" As Pritchard fumbled with keys, Margaret kept watch. She noticed several men she didn't recognize, rough-looking types who seemed more interested in watching than helping with the fire. One caught her eye and smiled unpleasantly. "Ethan," she murmured, "company." He glanced where she indicated, his expression hardening. "Hired guns. Briggs must be more serious than I thought." They retrieved the documents, copies of the adoption papers, land deeds, and other vital records. Ethan tucked them inside his coat just as commotion erupted outside. "Fire! The courthouse is burning." They rushed out to see new flames rising from the courthouse 2 blocks away. This was no accident. Someone was systematically destroying the legal infrastructure of Dry Creek. "They're trying to wipe the slate clean," Ethan said. "No records means no legal claims. Just whoever's strongest. Or whoever pays the most guns," Margaret added, noting more strangers filtering into town. They helped fight the courthouse fire, but it was hopeless. By noon, both buildings were smoking ruins. The town gathered in the street, fear and anger palpable in the crowd. That's when Harold Briggs climbed onto a wagon bed to address them. "Friends, this is a tragedy, but also an opportunity." His voice carried over the murmuring. "Without proper records, we need strong leadership to prevent chaos. I propose we form a committee to oversee land claims." "Led by you, no doubt," someone called out. "I have experience in business matters." "You have experience in buying children." Margaret's voice rang out clear and strong. She pushed through the crowd to face him. "Is that the kind of leadership Dry Creek needs?" Briggs's face reddened. "Now see here, Mrs. Cole. That was a legal arrangement." "Legal doesn't make it right." She turned to address the crowd. "You all know what happened. He tried to buy my 12-year-old sister. Is that who you want making decisions about your land, your families?" "What's done is done." Briggs blustered. "We need to focus on the future." "The future you planned by burning down half our town." A gasp ran through the crowd. Briggs stepped back as if slapped. "How dare you accuse?" "Where were you when the fire started?" Sheriff Watson asked quietly. The crowd turned to him, surprised. "Simple question. Briggs, you and Quinn both. Where were you?" "I was conducting business." "At 4 a.m, the sheriff's voice hardened. "Funny thing, guard at the land office said he smelled whiskey right before someone hit him. You don't drink, Briggs, but Quinn surely does." All eyes turned to Samuel Quinn, who was trying to edge away through the crowd. "Now hold on," he stammered. "You can't prove nothing." "Can't I?" Watson pulled something from his pocket, a distinctive flask with SQ engraved on it. "Found this near the courthouse. Yours, isn't it? Quinn." The crowd's mood turned ugly. Destroying records affected everyone. Land claims, marriages, births, deaths. The very fabric of their community. "String them up," someone shouted. "Burn their houses like they burned ours." The situation was spiraling toward mob justice when Ethan's voice cut through like a blade. "Enough." He stood on the wagon where Briggs had been, commanding attention. Margaret watched with a mixture of pride and worry as he faced down the angry crowd. "We're not a mob," he said firmly. "We're a community, and communities handle things proper." He looked at Sheriff Watson. "Arrest them both. We'll hold them for the circuit judge." "On whose authority?" Briggs demanded. "The jail record's burned too. You've got no proof." "On my authority," Watson said, "and the testimony of everyone here who sees you for what you are. Boys, take them in." As deputies moved to arrest both men, Samuel Quinn made one last desperate play. "You can't do this. I got rights. Those are my daughters." "No," Margaret said, stepping forward. "We're not yours anymore. We never were. You gave up any claim the day you tried to sell us." She pulled out the adoption papers Ethan had saved. "These documents make it official. Sarah and Lily are legal wards of Ethan Cole, and I'm his wife by choice, not by sale. You ungrateful." His words cut off as Ethan moved, faster than thought. One moment, Quinn was raising his hand as if to strike. The next, he was on the ground, Ethan's boot on his chest. "You will never," Ethan said softly, dangerously, "raise a hand to any woman in my family again. Is that clear?" Quinn nodded frantically. The crowd watched in satisfaction as he and Briggs were hauled away. As the excitement died down, people began discussing the real problem, rebuilding their records and their town. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward. "I've got all the school enrollment records at my house," she said. "Birth dates, family names. It's a start." "I've got employment records for half the town," another merchant offered. "The church has marriage and baptism records," the pastor added. One by one, people began volunteering what documents they'd kept. It wouldn't replace everything, but it was enough to begin rebuilding. "What about land claims?" someone asked. Ethan spoke up. "I've got surveys and boundary markers for my property and all the neighboring spreads. Kept copies in the bank safe. I'll make them available to help reestablish proper lines." The crowd's attitude toward him shifted perceptibly. Here was a man with power choosing to use it for the community's good. As they finally rode home late that afternoon, exhausted and smoke-stained, Margaret reached over to take his hand. "You could have used this chaos to your advantage," she said. "Expanded your holdings, claimed disputed land." "Could have," he agreed. "But that's not the man I want to be, or the example I want to set for your sisters." "Our sisters," she corrected softly. He smiled at that. "Our sisters." They found the ranch peaceful, the girls safe. Lily and Sarah ran out to meet them, full of questions about the fire. Over dinner, they explained what had happened, turning it into a lesson about community and standing up for what's right. "So Papa's really going to jail?" Sarah asked in a small voice. "Yes," Margaret said gently. "He made bad choices, and now he has to face the consequences." "Are you sad?" Margaret considered the question. "I'm sad for who he could have been, but I'm not sad he can't hurt us anymore." Later, after the girls were in bed, Margaret found Ethan on the porch, staring out at the darkening sky. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Long day," she said. "Long day," he agreed. "But good. In the end, town came together. Your father's locked up. Documents are safe. You were magnificent." She leaned into him. "The way you took control, helped people see past their anger. You're a natural leader. Never wanted to be. Just wanted to ranch, live quiet. But when the community needed you, you stepped up." She took his hand, threading their fingers together. "That's who you are. A man who does what's needed, even when it's hard." He turned to look at her, and she saw something new in his eyes, a heat that hadn't been there before. "Margaret," he said softly, "these past weeks, sharing a room but keeping apart, it's been torture." Her heart began to race. "For me, too. I wanted to give you time, to be sure, after everything you've been through." She silenced him with a kiss. Not the gentle, questioning kiss of their first time, but something deeper, surer. When they parted, both were breathing hard. "I choose you," she said firmly. "Not because I have to, not because there's nowhere else to go, but because I want you, all of you. The quiet rancher, the fierce protector, the gentle man who plays guitar in the evening. I choose all of it." He stood, pulling her up with him. "You sure?" "Never been more sure of anything in my life." He swept her into his arms then, carrying her into the house like a proper bride, their shadows merged in the lamplight. Two becoming one in truth at last. Much later, as they lay entwined in the bed they now truly shared. Margaret traced patterns on his chest. "What happens now?" she asked. "With the town, the records, everything." "We rebuild," he said simply, "stronger than before. Help our neighbors, raise our sisters, run our ranch." "Our," she repeated, savoring the word. "I like the sound of that." "Get used to it. You're stuck with me now. Mrs. Cole chose me fair and square." "And you chose me," she reminded him, "even when I was breaking your dishes and hiding in my room." "Best choice I ever made," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "even with the broken dishes." Outside, a coyote called to its mate across the darkness. The sound that had once seemed lonely to Margaret now felt like a celebration, wild things calling to each other across the vast spaces, choosing companionship in a hard land. She'd come to this ranch as property, traded for debts and whiskey, but tonight she lay here as a wife, a sister, a protector, a woman who'd found her strength in the crucible of choice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a town to rebuild, a trial to witness, sisters to raise, a ranch to run. But tonight, in the arms of the man who'd set her free by letting her choose her own chains, Margaret Cole was exactly where she wanted to be. The girl who'd once pulled a knife in defiance had become a woman who wielded love and fury with equal skill. And somewhere in the Texas night, in a jail cell reeking of smoke and failure, Samuel Quinn finally understood what he'd lost. Not daughters he could sell, but women who could soar. The fire he'd set had burned away more than records. It had burned away the last of their obligation to him, leaving only the family they'd chosen and the future they'd build with their own hands. The land office might be ashes, but the Cole Ranch stood strong, and in that strength, three sisters had found not just safety, but the freedom to become who they were meant to be. Spring came early to Texas that year, painting the ranch in wildflowers and possibility. Margaret stood in what would be the doorway of their new house, watching Ethan and the hands lay the foundation. 6 months had passed since the fires, since she'd truly become Mrs. Cole in every way that mattered. "Higher ceilings," she called out. "I want light, lots of light." Ethan paused in his work, wiping sweat from his brow. "Any higher, and we'll need to import timber from Oregon." "Then import it." She smiled at his mock exasperation. "This house is going to last generations. Might as well build it right." The old house would remain converted to quarters for the hands and storage. But this new house, rising from the earth like their new life together, would be theirs. She'd designed it herself, with Ethan's input. Wide windows, multiple doors, a kitchen big enough for a growing family, bedrooms for the girls with space to spare. "Margaret," Sarah's voice carried from the garden, "the roses are blooming." She walked to where her youngest sister knelt among the bushes they'd planted together. The roses were indeed blooming, red as blood, white as wedding dresses, pink as dawn. But it was the way they'd grown that caught the eye, twisted around each other, thorns and blooms intermingled. "Look," Sarah said softly, "they're fighting and dancing at the same time." "Roses do that," Margaret said, kneeling beside her. "They're tough plants. They fight for sun, for water, for space. But they're also beautiful. Proof that strong things can be lovely too. Like you." Margaret laughed, ruffling her sister's hair. "Like all of us Cole women." It still gave her a thrill. That name. The adoption had gone through officially, the circuit judge praising Ethan for taking on the responsibility. Samuel Quinn was serving 5 years for arson and attempted fraud. Harold Briggs had fled to California rather than face trial. "Mail's here," Lily called from the main house. At 15 now, she'd grown tall and confident, spending her days working with Miguel on horse training when not at school. Margaret met the mail rider at the gate. accepting the small bundle of letters. One bore the seal of the Cattlemen's Association, likely another contract offer. Ethan's reputation had grown along with the ranch's success, but it was the second letter that made her heart skip. She found Ethan at the well, washing off the day's dust. "Letter from Fort Worth," she said, "from that women's suffrage group I wrote to." He dried his hands, giving her his full attention. "What do they say?" "They want to establish a chapter here, in Dry Creek. They're asking if I'll help organize it." And I want to?" She met his eyes, chin raised. "I know it's controversial. I know some folks won't like it. But after everything we've been through, how can I not fight for women to have a voice?" He studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "When do they want to start?" "You don't mind." "Margaret, you threw a knife into my mantle the day we met rather than be traded like cattle. Did you really think I'd try to stop you from fighting for what's right?" She kissed him then, right there in the yard where anyone could see. 6 months of marriage hadn't dimmed the spark between them. If anything, it had grown stronger. "Besides," he added when they parted, "this ranch runs better since you took over the books. The hands respect you. You've got a good head for business. Why shouldn't women vote? They're already doing half the work." That evening, she gathered her sisters to discuss it. They sat in the parlor of the old house, lamplight casting warm shadows. "It's important work," she explained. "But it might bring trouble. People might treat us differently. I want you both to understand before I agree." "Will it help other girls?" Sarah asked. "Girls like we were—" "I hope so. If women can vote, they can change laws, protect daughters from being sold, make sure girls get educated." "Then we fight," Lily said firmly. "That's what Coles do. Right, stand up for what's right." Margaret felt her throat tight with pride. "When did you get so wise?" "Must be all that schooling you insist on." Lily grinned. "Mrs. Henderson says I could go to college if I wanted. Can you imagine me at college?" "Why not?" Ethan said from the doorway. "World's changing. Might as well change with it." The first meeting of the Dry Creek Women's Suffrage Society took place 2 weeks later in Mrs. Henderson's parlor. 7 women attended: the teacher, the pastor's wife, 2 ranchers' wives, the seamstress, the doctor's daughter, and Margaret. "They'll call us radicals." "Mrs." Henderson warned. "Troublemakers, unwomanly." "Let them," Margaret said. "I've been called worse for doing right." They drafted their charter that night, setting out their goals: education for all children regardless of gender, property rights for married women, and ultimately, the vote. It was ambitious, maybe impossible, but impossible things had happened before on this ranch. Word spread quickly. Some men forbade their wives from attending. Others, like Ethan, quietly supported the cause. The pastor surprised everyone by preaching on Deborah and Esther, women who'd led when leadership was needed. The first public meeting drew a crowd, supporters and detractors both. Margaret stood at the podium, her sisters in the front row, Ethan leaning against the back wall with his hands at easy distance from the guns he wore. "We're not here to destroy families," she began, her voice carrying clear. "We're here to strengthen them. When women have rights, children are protected. When mothers can own property, families have security. When wives have a voice, marriages become partnerships." "Partnerships," someone scoffed. "Next you'll want women wearing pants and running businesses." Margaret smiled. "I already run a business. The Cole Ranch books haven't been this clean in years, and I did it in a dress, though pants would be more practical for riding." Laughter rippled through the crowd, some supportive, some mocking. "The world is changing," she continued. "The railroad brings new ideas. Telegraphs connect us to distant places. We can cling to old ways and be left behind, or we can grow. I choose growth." The meeting ended without violence, though heated words were exchanged. As they walked home, Ethan took her hand. "Proud of you," he said simply. "Even if it costs us business, some of those men might not want to deal with you now. Then they're fools. You've increased our profits by 20% with your negotiations. Anyone who can't see past petticoats to capability doesn't deserve our business." That night, as they lay in bed in the old house, the new one still just walls and dreams, Margaret traced the scar on his jaw. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real," she whispered, "that I got to choose this life. Believe it?" He caught her hand, pressed it to his heart. "Every morning I wake up grateful you chose to come back from that crossroads." A soft knock interrupted them. Sarah's voice came through the door, small and frightened. "Margaret, I had the dream again." Margaret rose, wrapping herself in a robe. She found Sarah trembling in the hallway, tears on her cheeks. The dreams came sometimes, memories of their father, of being told she'd been sold. "Come here, little bird." Margaret led her to the kitchen, Ethan following. He stoked the fire while she heated milk. "I dreamed he came back," Sarah whispered. "Said the judge let him out, that I had to go with him." "Never," Ethan said firmly. He sat across from her, his presence solid as stone. "You're a Cole now, legal and binding. No one can take you from this family." "Promise." "I promise, and you know I keep my promises." Sarah managed a small smile. She did know. They all did. Ethan Cole's word was iron. As Margaret tucked her sister back into bed, Sarah asked, "Will I be brave like you someday?" "You already are, sweetheart. Every day you choose to heal, to trust, to grow. That's bravery." Walking back to their room, Margaret found Ethan standing at the window, looking out at the stars. "She'll be all right," Margaret said, sliding her arms around him from behind. "Time and love heal most wounds." "Speaking of time and love," he turned in her arms, expression serious. "There's something I've been meaning to discuss." Her heart skipped. "What?" "The new house, those extra bedrooms. Were you thinking just for your sisters? Or—" Oh. Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks. They'd been careful these 6 months, mindful of timing. But the new house, the stability they'd built. "Would you want that?" she asked. "Children of our own. Would you?" She thought of their life, full already with the girls. The ranch, her suffrage work. Then she imagined a baby with Ethan's gray eyes, a toddler following Lily around the corral, Sarah reading to a little one. "Yes," she said softly, "when we're in the new house, when things are settled. Yes." He kissed her then, deep and promising. "No rush," he murmured. "We've got time. Just wanted to know we were thinking along the same lines." "We usually are." She smiled. "Even when I'm throwing knives at your furniture." "Especially then. Took a strong woman to stand up that day. That's the kind of mother I want for my children, one who fights for them." Spring rolled into summer, the new house rising steadily. The suffrage society grew, adding members from surrounding towns. Margaret spoke at rallies, wrote letters to legislators, organized fundraisers. Not everyone approved, but respect grew even among detractors. One hot afternoon, as she worked in the study, Lily burst in, "Riders coming, lots of them." Margaret grabbed the shotgun, heading for the porch, but Ethan, coming from the barn, looked relaxed. "It's all right. That's John Morrison's crew. Probably hear about the bull I'm selling him." Morrison was one of the biggest ranchers in 3 counties, known for his traditional views. Margaret straightened her spine, ready for confrontation. But when Morrison dismounted, he touched his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Cole, heard your speech in Austin last month. My wife was there." "Oh." She came home full of ideas. He shifted uncomfortably. "Been thinking, my daughters are smart as whips. Seems foolish not to educate them proper. Wife says you know a good school in Fort Worth." Margaret blinked, then smiled. I do indeed. I'll have the information sent over. As Ethan led Morrison to see the bull, the rancher paused. Your wife's making waves. Cole. Good ones, I hope. Jury's still out. But I'll say this, my marriage has been better since my wife started speaking her mind. Turns out she had good ideas I'd been too stubborn to hear. He glanced back at Margaret. Maybe you're onto something. That evening, as they worked together in the garden, Ethan turning soil, Margaret planting, she told him about Morrison. Change comes slow, Ethan said. But it comes. You're planting seeds that'll bloom long after we're gone. Roses fight, Margaret murmured, echoing Sarah's words. But they bloom in spite of thorns. Because of thorns, he corrected. The thorns protect the bloom, like you protect your sisters, like you're protecting future daughters who won't be sold. She stood, dirt on her hands, sweat on her brow, love in her heart. We protect them, together. Together, he agreed, pulling her close despite the dirt. As the sun set over their growing home, painting the sky in shades of hope, Margaret thought about the journey from that bitter morning in her father's house to this moment. She'd been sent to humiliate a cold man who couldn't keep a wife. Instead, she'd found a partner who set her free to become herself. The new house stood half-built, testament to their growing dreams. The roses bloomed despite their thorns. 3 sisters had found safety and purpose. A woman had found her voice and used it to lift others. And in the space between what was and what would be, love grew like wildflowers after rain. Wild, stubborn, beautiful, and absolutely, completely chosen. The morning of their second wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crystalline sky that promised new beginnings. Margaret stood before the mirror in the completed new house. But this time the dress was one she'd chosen. Simple white cotton with delicate embroidery, made by her own hands with help from Sarah and Lily. You look beautiful, Lily said, adjusting the wildflowers in Margaret's hair. At 16 now, she'd grown into a confident young woman, already managing much of the horse training operation. Different from the first time, Sarah added softly. Now 13, she was the scholar of the family, headed to college in Austin come fall. Everything's different, Margaret agreed, touching her stomach where the slightest swell showed. 3 months along, Ethan's child growing beneath her heart. This time, I choose it all. Through the window, she could see the gathering crowd. Half of Dry Creek had come, not for spectacle but for celebration. The wooden arch Ethan built stood decorated with roses from their garden, red and white and pink. Thorns and all. Ready, Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, beaming. The teacher had become like a mother to them all, fierce advocate for education and women's rights alike. Ready, Margaret said, meaning it completely. The walk to the arch felt like floating. She saw Miguel grinning broadly, Big Tom dabbing at his eyes, Dusty trying to keep the younger ranch hands in line. The town doctor was there with his daughter, now secretary of their suffrage society, the pastor's wife, who'd started a shelter for women fleeing bad situations. Even John Morrison and his wife, their daughters dressed in their college-bound best. But Margaret only had eyes for Ethan. He stood beneath the arch in his best suit, the one he'd bought specially for this day. His gray eyes were bright with emotion as she approached, and when he smiled, she saw the man who'd given her freedom, partnership, and love in equal measure. Folks, the pastor began when she reached Ethan's side. We're here to witness something special. Not just a wedding, we did that 2 years ago, but a choosing, a declaration. Margaret and Ethan Cole have asked to renew their vows, not because they must, but because they want the world to know what they've built together. Ethan took her hands, his voice strong and clear. 2 years ago, a frightened girl was sent to humiliate me, but instead, I found my match, my partner, my love, Margaret. You chose to stay when you could have run, chose to build when you could have hidden, chose to love when you had every reason to protect your heart. Today, before our community, I choose you again, not as property or possession, but as the woman who made me whole. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, but her voice was steady. I used to be something passed between men, but you gave me a choice. You gave me wings and trusted me to fly, knowing I'd return not from duty, but from love. From today on, I am not the girl who was given away. I am the woman who chose you, who chooses you again, who will choose you every morning until my last breath. I am Margaret Cole, and I am exactly where I want to be. The rings, the pastor said. Sarah stepped forward with new bands, not the simple ones from their first ceremony, but rings Ethan had commissioned specially. Hers bore tiny roses engraved in the gold, complete with thorns. His was plain, but for 3 words inside, by her choice. As they exchanged rings, Lily read a passage from Elizabeth Barrett Browning about love that grows and strengthens. Sarah sang a hymn in her clear, sweet voice. The community that had once whispered about the cold rancher and his bought bride now witnessed a love that had transformed them both. By the power vested in me, and more importantly, by the power of your own free choice, I pronounce you husband and wife, again, by choice, forever. When Ethan kissed her, the crowd erupted in cheers. Somewhere in that crowd, Margaret knew, were women whose lives had changed because she'd found her voice. Girls who would grow up knowing they had choices. Men who'd learned that partnership made marriages stronger. The reception filled the yard of the new house. Tables groaned under food prepared by the ranch hands and townswomen together. Ethan's guitar came out, joined by fiddles and harmonicas. Dancing broke out as the sun began to sink. "Happy?" Ethan asked, swinging her around the makeshift dance floor. "More than I knew was possible," she said, then gasped, "Oh!" "What's wrong?" "Nothing." She grabbed his hand, placed it on her stomach. "The baby. First time I've felt it move." Wonder crossed his face as he felt the tiny flutter. Around them, the party continued. But they were in their own world, the 3 of them, soon to be 4. As evening came, Margaret found herself on the porch with her sisters and several other women. The talk turned, as it often did these days, to the future. "National suffrage meeting next year, Mrs. Morrison said. She'd become one of their strongest advocates after her daughters thrived in college. They want Texas represented. "We'll be there," Margaret promised. "All of us who can make it." "A pregnant woman traveling to raise rabble?" someone teased. "A mother fighting for her children's future," Margaret corrected. Nothing more natural than that. Ethan appeared with his guitar, and the gathering shifted. Soon everyone was singing, old songs and new ones, hymns and folk tunes, even a few drinking songs that made the pastor's wife blush, but sing along anyway. As the party wound down and guests began departing, each stopped to wish them well. The sheriff, who'd helped rebuild the town's records, the banker, whose wife now helped run the business, the shopkeeper, whose daughter would attend medical school come fall. "Look what you built," Mrs. Henderson said, embracing Margaret. "Not just a house or a family, a community where women's voices matter." "We built it," Margaret corrected. "All of us, together." Finally, only family remained. The sisters sat together on the porch steps, watching stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. Ethan played softly, the melody of Margaret's choice drifting on the evening breeze. "Remember when you threw that knife?" Lily asked suddenly. "That first day? How could I forget?" "I'm glad you did." Sarah said, "If you hadn't fought, hadn't chosen to stay and change things, we'd all be somewhere else," Lily finished. "Somewhere worse. Or maybe just different," Margaret said thoughtfully. But I'm glad we're here, all of us, together, building something new. To the Cole women, Ethan said, setting aside his guitar to join them. May they always fight like roses and bloom in spite of thorns. Because of thorns, they corrected in unison, laughing. As the evening deepened, Sarah and Lily headed inside to their rooms in the new house rooms with windows facing east toward the sunrise, toward the future. Margaret and Ethan remained on the porch, her head on his shoulder, his hand resting gently on their growing child. No regrets? He asked softly. Not one, she said firmly. Every broken dish, every hard choice, every fight for what's right, they all led here, to this moment, to us. To us, he agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. In the garden, the roses bloomed in magnificent defiance, their scent carrying on the night air. The new house stood strong around them, built to last generations. In town, women gathered to plan and dream and change the world one vote at a time. And on the porch of the Cole Ranch, two people who'd found each other across a chasm of pain and circumstance held tight to their chosen love. The girl who'd been traded for debts had become a woman of influence and power. The man who'd been too cold to keep a wife had become a partner who cherished his family's freedom as much as his own. Together, they'd built something that would outlast them both, a legacy of choice, of courage, of love that asked nothing but gave everything. As Margaret drifted toward sleep, safe in Ethan's arms, she thought she heard music on the wind, not just his guitar, but the voices of all the daughters who would grow up free because someone had been brave enough to say, I choose. And in the Texas night, under stars that had witnessed so much transformation, the Cole Ranch stood as testament to a simple truth that love, real love, was not about possession or control. It was about the freedom to stay, the courage to grow, and the daily choice to build something beautiful from the ashes of what had been. The virgin bride sent to Humiliate had become the woman who chose her destiny. The lonely fingers that drew music from guitar strings had indeed drawn her tight against his heart. And in that choosing, in that drawing close, they'd found their forever, not perfect, not easy, but absolutely, completely, wonderfully theirs. The roses would bloom come morning, thorns and all, and Margaret Cole would wake beside the man she'd chosen, in the house they'd built, surrounded by the family they'd made, ready to face whatever came next, because she'd learned the greatest secret of all, that sometimes the cage that seems to trap you is actually the sky in which you learn to soar. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story, please subscribe to Wild West Night, like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people discover these tales of love, courage, and choice in the American frontier. Your support means the world and helps keep these stories alive.